Hi, I'm Dan Wallin.
I'm Achabash.
I'm Rabia.
I'm Bob, and I'm a developer advocate at Microsoft.
Have you considered adding real-time collaboration into your apps?
Do you want to learn how to collaborate more efficiently on code your team is writing?
It's now possible to build amazing apps leveraging real-time communication technologies across
Azure, Microsoft 365, Power Platform, and GitHub that you can tap into today.
These technologies can be used to increase user productivity as well as developer productivity
and take your applications to the next level.
That's why we're inviting you to join us on October 26th
to learn how to develop real-time collaborative apps together.
Join us for a live developer conversation where we'll look at what collaborative apps are,
why you should consider adding real-time collaboration to your apps.
You'll learn how to get started and build the skills needed to develop and deploy these applications.
Maybe you have an existing line of business web app.
You can add real-time collaboration into the application
so data instantly syncs across multiple clients.
Maybe you work for a startup that needs to integrate
live audio, video, and chat into the applications
to allow people to talk with each other directly. Maybe you're a student. Come learn new skills
that you can begin using right now.
These skills will also prepare you
for a job in the modern collaborative workplace.
Whether you're a professional developer, a student,
or startup, please join us live for some fun conversation and code.
And let's learn how to develop real-time collaborative apps
together.
Hey everyone, welcome. So happy to have you here for our Learn Together event on building real-time collaborative applications. My name is April Dunham and I'll be your host today. I'm a cloud advocate here at Microsoft and so happy to have you with us for the next 2 hours so that we can learn together on how to add real-time data, chat, video, and all of that into the applications that we built. Just a reminder that we are live and interactive today, so make sure that you get your thoughts and your questions in our chat. We're going to kick things off by having a conversation around what collaboration first development is. To get the conversation started, let's bring in my colleague, Dan Wallin. Hey, Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, April. I'm excited to be here with you to talk about collaboration and all these things we can do. So let's jump right into it and start off with what does it mean to build real-time collaborative apps? I mean, we have line of business apps out there. Some folks use SaaS, software as a service type apps. So what if we wanted to build collaboration in? When I say that, what comes to your mind, April?
When I think of, collaboration and apps, I think of apps that I use every day, like Microsoft Teams and Slack and Word Online, Google Docs and all of that. And to me, those kind of encapsulate what a collaboration first approach is in an application. And when I think about it further, I guess I think of 3 main buckets of things that a collaborative app does. One being, real-time data exchange. How can, like when we talking about the Word example, how can we, see who's typing what when we're in a document and collaborate that way? The other thing I think of is real-time communication. That's what Teams and Slack does really well, being able to chat and collaborate in real time. And then I think also about real-time presence. How can we see who else is in an application and see if they're available or away? So those are the 3 main pillars I think that I think of when I think about collaborative apps, but curious to hear you expand on that, Dan, and kind of dive deeper into each of these.
Yeah, I think for real-time data exchange, the first thing that comes to probably most people's minds, especially mine, is WebSockets or one of those fallback technologies that browsers support, because they provide a great way to get that real-time TCP/IP type connectivity, so we can get that, close to instant data exchange between browsers. But of course, as we get multiple people involved, that kind of takes things up a notch with that, but certainly possible. With real-time communication, you already mentioned a lot of the apps I use as well, like Teams or Slack or something like that. And when it comes to custom apps, how cool would it be, where appropriate, to add audio, video, or chat right into the app so that as people are working with real-time data, they could also even talk to each other, see each other, or chat with each other. But of course, to do that, we need to know when people are available, and that's where real-time presence comes in. So a little bit later in some of the sessions, as we talk about these different items here, we're going to talk about Microsoft 365, and specifically Microsoft Graph has some APIs that you can subscribe to learn about people presence. Because, April, if I want to collaborate with you and you're in a meeting, it'd be nice to know when you're out of the meeting and available so that I can reach out to you.
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of set the stage here of what, a collaborative first app would look like. Why don't we talk through, Dan, some scenarios of what this would look like?
Yeah. So one of the scenarios we're going to talk through is really just real-time data focused. And let's say that April and I, and maybe some other folks, are going to collaborate on an application. And this particular application allows us to pick speakers for an internal company event that we're going to have. And as we do this, April and I and anyone else involved would like to see instant changes to this data grid that you see. So April, if we were to pick some talks here for real, what do you want to go with here?
Let's see, I really like Denise and Klaus. Their topics look good, so we could go ahead and approve those two.
Okay. And this is where real-time collaboration instantly kicks in, because April, I might now respond with, okay, did you select them or do you want me to select them?
Yeah, exactly. How do we know? Like, oh, what do we got to do? Refresh the screen to see like who submitted that button, who clicked the approve, right?
And that is a real story, folks, because I've actually had to do this for real. And that exact scenario's come up where I say, hey, April, did you do it? Oh, yeah, I did. Just refresh your screen. Well, with real-time data, that could be instant. And then, maybe we decline the last one. Maybe it doesn't fit in, but why? So we might want to add some notes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Seeing those notes again in real time, similar to what we can do with Word or Google Docs, would be great for this whole experience, right? Without having to do that refresh and have that real-time collaboration.
Exactly. And that's where collaboration, some of these challenges come into play that will be talked about a little bit later. Because if April types into one of these cells here and then I type in exactly the same time, we'd want to make sure that the data gets merged in the proper order, just like Word Online, Google Docs, and things like that do. That's pretty challenging, it turns out, to do on your own. So throughout some of the sessions coming up, you're going to learn a little bit more about options out there for doing that type of thing. So April, another scenario we have is related to travel. Do you want to walk us through that one?
Yeah, so I think we've probably all been here on this one. So common thing we have, say I want to travel from the United States here to South America. That could be a multi-stop point to get there, right? You might have to have a couple layovers to be able to get to the ultimate destination. Well, what happens when you have a delay and you miss one of your connecting flights? So what do you have to do? Well, typically you got to get on the phone with a travel agency, have them try to help you find an alternative route so that you can get to your destination. It's a lot of getting on the phone with them, trying to take maybe handwritten notes, right? Or look at your phone and figure out where they're talking about. Not the most ideal, probably, right? Experience, Dan. I'm sure you've been there too. So wouldn't it be great if we could get some of those collaborative design aspects into this scenario by having an application where the travel executive here can pull it up and it can show me visually what routes they're showing that I could take to get and reschedule that to get to my destination. So I can follow along with that. And then icing on the cake being maybe I can add in some video chat so I can personalize the experience a bit more and be able to visualize that. So to me, that would be the ideal experience rather than having to juggle the phone and notes and everything. And I'm sure you've been there too, Dan.
I won't name the airports, but I can't even tell you how many times I've been through this scenario. Many times. It's hard to keep track because, they'll tell you, well, if you go through this city, it takes this long, and this city, this long. And like you said, you kind of have to take notes. But if I could just see it, and if I could even suggest cities back, that would be pretty amazing. And we both could collaborate and possibly, like you said, from a customer service standpoint, take it up a notch by adding video. So that would be pretty nice. Well, that's just two of an infinite number of scenarios, but there are some challenges that come up. We've already mentioned one or two of those already, but April, what are some of the challenges that you can think of when it comes to real-time collaboration in apps?
Yeah, so I guess two really come to mind from what we just talked about. Take that travel scenario, for example. That's like a global communication scenario where I might be in South America and talking with the travel agent in the United States. So the first thing that comes to mind there are latency issues. So how do we get around that? That could be a potential issue and concern. The other thing that comes to mind would be, how do we choose the right technology? You mentioned earlier WebSockets. How do I know if that's the right approach versus some of these real-time collaboration techniques and adding that in? So those are the two that kind of popped out for me as potential issues. But Dan, I know you've built a lot of real-time collaboration into apps, so you probably have some yourself that you'd want us to share.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, like in the notes, when we type at the same time, that's actually super challenging, it turns out. And so you actually need kind of like a get merge, but for data that's flowing into all these collaboration clients, all these browsers, if that's what we're doing. And that actually can be pretty tricky. You can certainly send the data with something like WebSockets or one of the fallback technologies, but actually getting it to work as you'd expect once it renders in the browser, that's a whole nother story. Another thing that comes up is if we're doing, say, audio video. Well, now do you have dedicated hardware? Maybe you use some cloud options there, but it'd be nice if we didn't have to worry about that, of course. And then that also gets into learning APIs. Browsers these days do have some really nice APIs for audio and video and more, but do you really have time to build that from scratch, or can we build on top of something that might be available?
Yeah, so great point. So far, what have we did? We've addressed the challenges that we might face. We talked about some scenarios for collaboration first design. I guess the next thing sticking out that I'd like to ask is really, how does this actually work? What would a collaboration first design approach look like?
Yeah, and I think this really boils down to how do you start your apps in the first place? How do you architect? When you go into the meetings, what are you doing? And speaking from my own personal experience, normally we'll have a whiteboard and we'll start speccing out the architecture of the code, the data, security, APIs, things like that. But when's the last time you actually said, hey, that screen could really benefit if multiple people could join and collaborate on that data? Now, I'm not going to say that's right for every screen or even every app, because it's not, but there are many cases where collaboration would be super effective. April, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, so many cases where I could see where that would be helpful. I think in Power Apps land, because that's where I do a lot of my work, right? Like, wouldn't it be great to be able to have real-time presence in a Power App and see who's working in at the same time, have real-time notes and collaboration. So there's no shortage of instances where this would be really helpful.
Definitely. Well, it's been great talking with you, April. Why don't you walk everyone through what we're going to be covering in the rest of the event, because we have a lot of good info.
Yeah, this has been a really fun conversation. We have a lot of great sessions ahead of us. I believe right after this, we have yourself, Dan, and Dan talking about real-time data into your apps and how we can bring that into your applications. After that, we're going to have Pialis and Reza going to talk about adding real-time communication into applications. And you'll want to stick around also for the last two sessions we have with Aicha and George. They're going to be talking about bringing your application where your users work every day. This is all about the presence and how we can have presence inside of our application using Graph and all that. And then finally, closing it out, we have Bridget and Burke talking about how we can enhance development, collaboration, and productivity with some new GitHub technology. So that should be pretty exciting, and definitely want to stick around for all the great sessions that we have. And with that, why don't we just go ahead right into our next session?
Welcome, everyone. We're excited to be here with you today to talk about adding real-time data into your apps. I'm here with my colleague, Dan Roney, and you want to introduce yourself quick, Dan?
Yeah, hi, I'm a program manager on the Fluid Framework platform team. I'm here to talk to you about Fluid Framework a little bit today. I'm really in charge of our partner outreach on the team, so looking forward to getting the message out there.
Excellent. And I'm Dan Wallin again. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. And like I said, we're really excited to talk about the data aspect of collaboration. And that's really what Dan and I are going to focus on. So when it comes to real-time data collaboration, there are some challenges. First off, you have to pick the right technology, of course. But even once you start to send data across multiple clients, there's a lot of challenges that can come in. And Dan's going to talk about that in just a moment. But why would we want to collaborate? Well, let's say Anna and Kevin are working together, and maybe they're working on an app that's one step above Hello World, a to-do app. And you can see that they can add in some different items here. So Dan, what are some of the challenges that come in as we work with this type of application though?
Well, when you've got an app like this and you've got multiple people manipulating the data at the same time, it can get tricky to make sure that all the users are having the same experience. And so when you've got maybe two users editing the same piece of text, or they're moving content around independently, you want to make sure that everybody's seeing things in a similar way. And this is where really the sequence of the edits comes into play.
Exactly. And I kind of think of it like, Word Online or Google Docs or something like that. They get it right. But to do that on our own is a little bit challenging for sure.
So this does seem like something you could build with WebSockets though, right?
Well, yes and no, right? I think that's the first thing that comes to mind with most people is, we get a web app out there and then we set up a server. So we have maybe a WebSocket client and it communicates with a WebSocket service. And that is great when the data just needs to flow and you don't necessarily care about the ordering of the data. So in other words, I'm not worried about the merging to make sure, Dan, that if you typed and I typed, that we don't type over each other. And that's where WebSockets, it can be a little more challenging. And of course, there's other fallbacks in addition to WebSockets too. But Dan, why don't you walk us through? I know there's some other options as well that can handle some of this merging of the data.
Sure. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Fluid framework, and this is something we built to try to solve this collaboration problem, and it's built on WebSockets for real-time communication, but it's a client-side library that you use to structure the data, model your own data, so that you really only have to worry about the user experience in your client web app. And so the Fluid framework comes with a set of data structures. One of them is the shared map that we'll be talking about a little bit later. And then that library and that runtime are talking to a service that are keeping the clients in sync and then also storing the data from the collaboration session. And so then when multiple users enter the session, now each of them are making changes to these data structures, and each of those edits is modeled as an operation that is sent to the service. And then the service's job is to stamp that with a sequence number and broadcast it out to all the other clients. We call this total order broadcast. And so each client is guaranteed to have the same operations in the same sequence so they can use that information to render the same experience.
Yeah, and I kind of think of that, as I mentioned earlier, it's almost like we're used to Git merges for files, but in this case, it's almost like a Git merge on all of the clients.
Yeah,
now,
it's a lot like that.
When it comes to that, Dan, what do I need to do as a developer on the server side, though, for this?
Well, that's the great part. And there does need to be a service, but none of your code is running on the service. There's no business logic on the service side. So it's really a utility that we provide that is really just, it doesn't know anything about those operations. It's just making sure that all the clients have them all.
So yeah, it sounds like basically the data flows into the service, it stamps them with a ordering, total order broadcast, and then the clients then are responsible for the merging. So I would guess the latency on that must be pretty phenomenal.
Oh yeah, it's super quick. Because the service isn't really doing anything with the data, it can turn that right around. And so that's why we came up with this architecture, is so that we could build really snappy collaborative experiences on the client.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit more about the Fluid framework then, Dan.
Yeah, so the Fluid framework is something we came up with here at Microsoft to power our next generation of collaboration experiences. We made a decision to open source this so that we want the core technology to be out in the open so that people can contribute to it and so that people can take advantage of it in their own applications as well. Like I said, it handles the sync and the storage, and because we're really focused on the data sync, it can work with any view framework. And so you'll see a lot of our examples are built in React because we know React, but it works with Angular, Vue, whatever you want to use.
Well, and that's, for me, that's a big deal because on a given day, I am working with maybe React, but the next day I'm working with Angular, and it really changes. So pretty much as long as you can use JavaScript, you could integrate this in, right?
Yep.
Excellent.
So let's see the Fluid framework in action and take a look at some code in a brainstorming app that we've built.
Sounds great. So to start off, this application is going to be able to allow Dan, I, and really anyone else. We have 3 people. I added myself twice, so I'm going to be the second person, but Dan is also in here. So what we can do is we can hit Add Note. And what this will allow us to do is drag this around. And you'll notice as I drag it around, you'll automatically see it. So I'm going to say, Dan, if we were, I don't know, maybe planning a team get together, I'm going to say, let's go to the movies. But Dan, feel free to add, whatever you want to add. And I'll add on my number 2 over here. I'll add something as well. There's Dan adding 2. And I don't know, Go drive cars, something, those little cars, maybe. And then you'll notice that Dan made it a different color. And as we do that, instantly, we'll see the changes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say go to movies is great, but we can't really talk at the movies. So you know what, Dan, I like your idea better. So I'm going to vote it. Go ahead, Dan. I think you said you love putt-putt golf,
Yep,
right?
I like that one too.
Okay, so you'll notice that that bubbles up to the top here in our selected items, all in real time. And then I also like, go and drive those little mini race cars. That'd be kind of fun. So I'm going to go ahead and check that one, and you'll see that the votes just sort based on it, but everything is in real time across this application. So I think we're ready to go there, Dan. I guess we're going to go putt-putt, huh?
Looks like it.
Okay. Well, let's go into this a little more detailed on the files and talk through these. So we're going to show a React app, but as Dan mentioned earlier, this could be any type of app. A typical create React app is going to have an index TSX. But what we're going to do is, instead of scattering the Fluid framework code all around the React app, might it be better to put that in one place, right, Dan?
Yeah, we didn't want every one of the React components to have to worry about talking to the Fluid data structures. So we just centralize them there in a brainstorm model that can kind of abstract that from the rest of the app.
Exactly. So what that'll allow for is now data can flow over, and then from there, it can flow on down into our different components. So we have a brainstorm view here, and then that ultimately is going to load a note space, kind of the canvas for the notes, which will then load our note TSX here at the very bottom, that component. So now that you've seen that, let's go ahead and jump over to our code. And what we have here is the project. And Dan and I are going to kind of walk you through those core building block pieces. So first off, in index TXX that you're going to see here, there's really just standard React functionality here. Nothing special, except for one thing. You'll notice that we have a little async start function. And that's because we're going to call this get fluid container. Now, Dan, earlier you mentioned that the work we do as developers is done in the browser, but we need to communicate to the server, of course. So can you walk us through kind of what is this doing?
Yeah, so the fluid container is an important concept. It's really the atomic unit of storage and the permission boundary within the fluid world. And so at this point, you are establishing or retrieving a container from the service, which then gives you that container, if you will, to attach your data structures to.
Excellent. Yeah, so it looks like from there, once we get all connected and we get back our resources, we're then going to go ahead and pass that as a prop down into our brainstorm view. Now, the brainstorm view is where things get interesting. You'll notice up top that we do have a little bit from the Fluid framework, but let's just skip right down to the JSX. And earlier, Dan mentioned this brainstorm model. And Dan, you want to walk us through here? It looks like we have several components and the models being passed into these.
Yeah, like I said, we're keeping the data model, separate from the React components, and we just pass it through as a property. So we're not polluting this area with all that logic. And then you can also see you have access to the members. That's another Fluid concept that gives you access to all the other people that are in the collaboration session.
Nice. One thing to add to this is that while we passed it as props here, you could certainly use other options like context or something like that too. But as far as the model itself, this is really where all the action occurs. So I'm going to kind of go right to the top here. And while I'm not going to open package JSON, if I did, you would see a Fluid framework package installed. And you'll notice this is what Dan mentioned a little bit earlier, shared map. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Now, this brainstorm model, you'll see it has some different functions here for moving notes and adding notes and setting notes and changing color and things like that. But let's skip on down here, Dan, a little further. Let's go down to right here. And when I first saw this code, when I started working with Fluid a while back, Dan, the first thing that came to mind was, as a developer, I've used the JavaScript map object. And it looks a lot like that, right? So walk us through these functions here.
Yeah, and that's one of our objectives with the framework, is to make it really approachable to web developers and lean into existing web norms. And so the shared map is meant to behave a lot like a map. So you can see the bunch of gets and sets there. So all you really know is that you're setting data in this map object, and you can see we're kind of keying it off of an ID for the note, and we're giving it a name and a value. But then once you set that value, then you're kind of handing it off to the Fluid Framework runtime, and it takes care of keeping that in sync across all the rest of the clients. And so all the other clients are seeing that as a change in the data in that shared map.
Right. And that's what I love about it. The simplicity it's very analogous to the map we're used to in regular old JavaScript, but yet this is able to communicate to that service you mentioned. Now, you mentioned that other clients then are going to get this from the service. So let's talk through how that aspect would work. So if we go down to the bottom here, you're going to notice there's a set change listener, and we're going to take that shared map object and basically subscribe to a value changed. Now, that just sets it up. But let's jump into this note space. This is where the notes are actually rendered on the canvas that you saw earlier. And let's come into this area right here, Dan. It looks like we have a use effect because we're doing React in this case, but it looks like we're doing that change listener right here. So kind of walk us through what's going on up here with the notes and things as that gets called.
Well, sure. This is just where we, listen for those changes and then re-render the notes. So you can see, you saw when we were both collaborating that those notes were updating in near real time. Even as we each typed, you could see the changes being applied.
Yeah, exactly. So this is basically just setting the state for React. It then iterates through the notes and renders those. But we know about different changes to the Fluid model through this kind of subscription here, if you will, and then we unsubscribe. So that's the general walkthrough on what's going on with this code. So basically, as a quick review, we set up the connection. That's being done right here. And then from there, we just abstract all our code out into a model, and then we can pass that model around our app and synchronize it. And this can be done, again, as Dan mentioned, in Angular, Vue, React, or whatever we'd like. Excellent. So Dan, tell us a little more about the service aspect. I know there is a local option, right, for development, but when it comes to remote development, and we want to do it for real, I should say, what's going on there?
Yeah, like I said, the service is necessary, but it's not something that we want you to have to worry about. And so we have an Azure Fluid Relay service available. This is something that you would just provision in your Azure portal. And it comes with everything you would expect from an Azure service in terms of uptime and scalability and performance and that kind of thing. So you really don't have to worry about it. And then you just take that connection information and put it in your app, and you have easy access to the relay service to keep your apps all in sync across the clients. This is something we've been working on for a little while. We talked about the private preview at Build, and it is just about to go into public preview.
Excellent. I love it because the setup is super simple, and then it's just up to you to write the client side Fluid code, and you're off to the races. You can do this. So what about information? How can we learn a little bit more about this?
Sure. So the fluidframework.com is really the place to start. So that's kind of the homepage for our open source project. There's lots of good content there, documentation that'll get you up and running, help you understand how these distributed data structures work. We've got another repo out there, Fluid Examples, where you can see things like the simplified version of this brainstorm app and some other examples you can pull down and easily get up and running quick to see how Fluid works.
Nice.
And then when you're ready to go deeper, what can they do?
Good question. Yeah. So if you want to go to the open source options out there, obviously the packages, I mentioned some of those a little bit earlier, those are up on NPM, but you can actually go to the GitHub Fluid Framework repo and you can see what's going on for real. You can contribute. They certainly welcome contributions. And then if you want to just get to the demo that we just ran, you can get to a simplified one, as Dan mentioned a little bit earlier. But if you wanted to get the one that Dan and I used, you can go to this link here, this aka.ms link. So with that, Dan, I'm super excited about adding real-time data collaboration into apps, because I just think there's so many scenarios out there.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for joining me here. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Thanks.
Well, with that, let's turn it back over to April.
Wow, thanks guys. What a dynamic duo of Dans we have there. Thank you both for that great introduction to the Fluid framework and the brainstorm app that we're going to be using throughout the event today. If you want to learn more about the Fluid framework, you can go over to fluidframework.com and get all of the information you need. Or if you're a video fan like I am, you can head over to our Microsoft 365 developer YouTube channel, and you can catch up on all of that information that we have there on Fluid Framework, on Microsoft 365, Graph, Power Platform, and even more. So you can catch that at aka.ms/M365 YouTube. Now, before we transition to our next session, we did have a question in the chat that I wanted to mention. Nilo asked, are we speaking about collaborative applications within an organization or collaborative applications in a business-to-business or business-to-consumer scenario? That's a really great question. They call out that, in their humble opinion, there are great opportunities in opening up collaboration with customers. So great question. I wanted to make sure to call out here. All the technologies that we're covering today can be used in all of those situations. So all the above. It can be within your own internal organization, in business-to-business scenarios, and business-to-consumer scenarios. So that's really the great thing about it, is the sky is the limit here with some of the real-time collaboration tools and techniques that we're showing. So definitely wanted to make sure to call that one out. Now, we've talked about real-time collaboration and Fluid Framework. Now let's hand it over to Piali and Reza to share how we can add real-time communication into our applications.
Thanks. So my name is Piali Day, and I am a program manager for Azure Communication Services. And with me today, I have Reza. Hey, Reza.
Hi, I'm Reza Giande, and I'm an engineering manager at Azure Communication Services.
Awesome. So here we are today to talk to you about real-time communication challenges. So far, you have heard about challenges in real-time data collaboration. So now let's talk about challenges that come up when we want to communicate in real time with one or more people. So to have a successful real-time communication platform, we would want a low latency, high quality solution, which is cost effective, reliable, and secure as well. But as we all know, building new communication experiences across consumer and enterprise applications can be very complex, often requiring considerable investment and specialized expertise. So there is also some challenges that comes from a developer perspective. So Reza, do you want to highlight a couple more challenges there as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from a developer perspective, when I'm designing an application for myself or designing a new service, I want to focus on the features of my application and don't want to focus on figuring out how to do WebRTC, how to do real-time messaging. I want to have a ready-to-use service so I can leverage. So being able to use a system like that, that would really help me as a developer to focus on what matters to me the most.
Makes sense. So that is where Azure Communication Services comes. So what ACS or Azure Communication Services is? ACS is actually a fully managed platform that enables the developers to bring in their own custom communication experiences to connect with the customers and the partners. So think of a video call with a doctor, a voice call with your financial advisor, or maybe a SMS communication service for your upcoming airline booking. ACS or Azure Communication Services makes it super easy for you to add voice and video calling, chat, SMS, PSTN, everything to your mobile apps, desktop applications, and websites with just a few lines of code. So let me talk a little bit about what Microsoft, so how ACS is built. So as you can see in this diagram, that Azure Communication Services is built on top of Microsoft Azure. So all the good things that you get from Microsoft Azure, you will also get in ACS. It has the full scalability and reliability of Azure. Also, Microsoft ACS uses the back end of Microsoft Teams. And as we all know that around 2 million users around the world uses Teams on a daily basis. so you can trust the back end of this product. Now let's talk about what we offer as a package from Azure Communication Services, right? So ACS is offered as a set of SDKs and APIs that helps you to add interactive, high quality audio, video calling to your service. And then you can also do voice calls, video calls. You can analyze the call metadata. You can even record calls, transcribe calls with our APIs. Talking about chat, you can integrate chat capabilities with an easy-to-use, low-maintenance interface to enable one-on-one chat or group chat functionality with all the core functionality that you would expect from a robust chat experience. Now, Reza, do you want to talk about some of the other modalities here?
Yeah, apart from the chat and video calling that you mentioned, we also offer a simple setup SMS experience. So when people want to have text messaging capabilities inside the application to connect with their users that prefer mobile communication, they can use our SMS services. We also have telephony services infrastructure for provisioning phone numbers and like end-to-end communication scenarios. And also we provide network relay support with turn protocol for when both or one of the users are behind a firewall.
Fantastic. So now that we have talked a lot, let's see some code, right? So Reza is going to help us to understand how ACS chat and audio video calling works. Over to you, Reza.
Thank you. So we saw the brainstorming application earlier that was built on top of Fluid. And now, as a developer, I want to build a chat experience inside this application. So the way I'm thinking about it is, in order for me to share this brainstorming session with someone, I'm going to send the URL to them. And you can see that the ID of the session is already in the URL. So when they join this URL, they would see the same session as me. I'm going to take the same approach for the chat as well. I want to make sure when I'm sharing the URL with someone, not only they see the same document, but also they join the same chat conversation. So the way I'm thinking about it is the experience is going to be the first person who is joining the session. At that time, we're going to create a chat conversation for them. And then, of course, for every person who is also opening the application, we create a user and then add them to that chat conversation. So let's see how that actually plays out in the code. In order to do that, I've created 3 Azure functions. So the first Azure function that you see here is for creating a user identity in ACS. And ACS is identity agnostic. So what it means is that you don't need to have your own user directory be synchronized with our user directory. All we give you is just an ID that you can map to your directory, and that will help you just maintain and leverage the user directory that you have. So in order to do it here, all I'm doing is I'm going to initialize our identity client, as you can see here. And this identity client is imported from the NPM package that we have for our identity. And then we have a simple method here that I'm calling to create a user identity and a token, so I can use for authentication. And I'm also mentioning here that I want this user to be able to chat, so it would have the necessary permissions for that. And then I'll send the user ID token, and when it's going to expire to the my front-end application that I'm going to show later, so the application can authenticate with this. The second part that I mentioned is creating a chat thread. So the first time that a session is opened, I want to make sure I also create a chat thread for that brainstorming session. In order to do that, I have created like a super user to kind of authenticate with and make sure I'm going to use this in some of my Azure functions to create and manage the chat threads. So in this specific scenario, what I'm doing is I'm initializing the chat client, which again can be imported from our chat NPM package. So I'm initializing it here with the token of the user, of the super user that I have stored in the context of this Azure function. And then all I'm going to do is just simply create a chat thread and then send the ID of this again to the front end, so it will know which chat thread you want to join. I just want to also quickly mention that this user that I've created is, of course, the creation is very similar to how the previous Azure function worked. I've used the same mechanism to create that user. And then the third Azure function is the join thread. which I will use when people are joining in the subsequent session. So like I already have a session created, there's already a chat thread for it. So it's like I'm sending a full URL to someone and now they're trying to join. So they already know which thread ID they want to join and the user is already created for them. So what I'm gonna do here again is authenticate with the super user that I've created earlier, initialize the chat client, but this time, instead of creating a thread, of course, I'm going to try to find the thread that is already created, and then use this user ID that was passed to the Azure function to add that user to the chat conversation. So now I'm going to have the setup for the service server side. Now I want to see the client side and how that comes into play. In order to do that, let me quickly go back to my browser. So when I want to build this app, as I mentioned before, like my focus is building the application. I want to focus on the features that I want to design here and not really worry about how to get the messages, how to do the polling, how to do pagination. And that's actually where we help you as well. So we have built this a great UI library for Azure Communication Services that gives you full flexibility in terms of layout. It gives you a lot of hooks so you can customize the experience, but at the same time, you don't have to worry about the complexity of real-time communication. We take care of all of those. And inside here, you can see we have chat composite, we have call composite and meeting composite that you can use in different scenarios. So for my case, I'm going to use the chat composite. So let's see how that works. As you can see here, you can even like play around here as well. So I'm just going to put the connection string for the resource that I have already created on Azure for communication services. And then I put my display name, and you can see it will start initializing this for me right now. And then when it initialization completes, I will be able to see the chat here. You see, this is a chat component. I can see the participants. I can send messages here. The messages are coming through for me. In this example, we had created bots so it automatically send messages, and you can see the polling happens, the scrolling, everything just works. And this part that you see here, this is essentially our chat composite control. So you can use this and customize it for your application. We have full documentation in terms of how you can set this up, but I'm not going to go through this because I'm actually going to do it inside our code here as well. So let's go to our front-end application. This is our main page. And you can see I have the brainstorming view, and now I want to add the chat element to it. I've created a chat React component that I'm going to show in a second. But before getting there, I want to highlight something. You can see here, I'm actually using the fluid user that was created already in the application. And this is, again, shows the power of being identity agnostic. You can have your user system from any system that already exists in your application, or if you have your own Active Directory or any other mechanism for maintaining your user directory, and you can just connect that to the to ACS and then leverage the same information here as well. So let's go to the chat pop-up and see how this React component is created. If you look at the code here, you notice that I have used this chat composite React control, which actually is imported from the UI library that I mentioned earlier. And we're going to have the link for that in the show notes as well, so you can find our UI libraries easily there and play with them. So I'm importing this chat composite control, and all I need to do is actually pass a chat adapter to it. So let's see how the chat adapters are going to get created. In order to create a chat adapter, we have this create Azure Communication Chat Adapter that, again, you can import from our React library. But let me show you how I'm actually setting that up. So I'm creating this React control. I've created a hook for it that the first time it will create the adapter. And the way it works is, again, it follows the steps that I mentioned earlier. First, it tries to get the ID of the chat thread from the URL. So like this would be used in the subsequent visits. But for the first person, when the ID does not exist yet in the URL, it's going to use our first Azure function to create a chat thread for that for this conversation, and then add that to URL. So when I share the URL, the other people will be able to join the same session. next, it will create a user and token for this user who's on the client, so they can actually authenticate and join the chat conversation, and then which uses the Azure function for creating user and token. And finally, I'm going to use the third Azure function to actually have this user that we just created with the name that actually come from the Fluid section to join the chat conversation that is created. By this time, now all the setup on the service is ready. So now all I'm going to do is use this create Azure Communication Chat Adapter function that I mentioned is provided by the UI library, and just initialize it with the endpoint of the resource, the user that wants to essentially get authenticated for this adapter, what name shows up, their credential, and also the chat thread ID that they're going to join. And that does it for us. So now let's go back to the application and then see what happens here. So I'm in this application. I'm just gonna start a fresh new session, and then let's see what happens. And then I'm also gonna create a new tab on the site so we can actually join the session at the same time. And then, so on the first one, if in a few seconds, you should be able to see that the document is going to get created, the Fluid document, and then the ID will show up in the URL. After that document is created, then it goes to the second phase, which is actually creating the chat thread. So it goes to the flow that was starting to create a chat thread, authenticate the users, and then ultimately join the chat threads after that is completed. So you see the document is created, the ID shows up here, and now I can actually move this on the side. Oh, you notice now the chat is also created. So you see the chat thread ID is popping up here as well. So now I'm going to take this and send it to the other person. So like this is, imagine my friend is now trying to join. And also you notice here, this is the chat pop-up for the ACS section. And actually it's using the user that came from Fluid. And as soon as the second person joins, we should be able to see here that the next person has joined the conversation, and then actually we can have a chat conversation together. This might, yeah, so here now the thread ID is actually on the URL. So this time it's gonna try to just use this one instead of trying to create a new chat thread for us again. And then it will authenticate. So the user has joined the session, you see it's on the session now, and now they joined the same chat thread as well. And of course, we can send messages back and forth as well. So as you can see, the messages get sent back and forth. The users are coming from the Fluid application, and everything works as expected. What do you think, Piali?
This is amazing. Isn't it exciting? It literally took you like 8 minutes to build a chat app from scratch. So why don't we keep the momentum going? Reza, do you want to talk quickly about our audio video modalities as well? Oh, yeah. So the UI libraries that I mentioned, I briefly mentioned that it also gives you other controls as well. So I'm going to quickly showcase our calling experience as well. So for calling, again, there's so much stuff that normally you would have to set up, but we have taken care of all of them again for you. So we have this calling composite React control, which acts very similar to the chat part. So I can show it again quickly here. I can put the connection string again. I put my name here, and then it will initialize our control. And then you can see, like, I can choose my camera or microphone. So I'm going to quickly turn on the camera here, and then I'll be able to show you how we can actually join the call. One thing I also want to highlight here is that not only you can join the ACS call, but also you can actually join the call that is created from the Teams, because we have interoperability built between ACS and Teams as well. So if you notice here, you can actually put the URL of a Teams meeting here, and then when you join, you can actually join that conversation as long as there is a trust built between the ACS resource and the Teams tenant. So I can actually join this call, and you can, so here you can actually see the experience, and all of these are customizable. And I can start the call, and then I can see the experience of inside the call. So all of these are built through this control,
you can import it the same way that I showed the chat control, and then use it inside your application as well. I think that should show a good part about calling. What do you think, Piali?
No, this is perfect. And I would literally say that if you want to check out our SMS and PSTN services as well, definitely check out our quick start and documentation. So here are some of the links and some of the resources. We will add all of these links in the show notes below so that you can check it out. But give it a try to our quick start, our demos, and let us know how you feel. That's all from us for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Piali and Reza. I really enjoyed getting to learn more about Azure Communication Services, and particularly love that demo that you showed there, Reza, showing just how easy it is to get started and simple and fast with Azure Communication Services to add in all the chat and the voice and all of that and video into our apps. It's really eye-opening. Be sure to look in the chat too for those links that they shared at the end. I did want to take a second to call out a question that I noticed in the chat because I'm a Power Platform person, so this question kind of interested me quite a bit. So someone was asking, I believe it was Karsten, is there a way to use Azure Communication Services in Power Apps? Can we use maybe, is there an out-of-the-box control or maybe a Power Apps component framework control for that? So I wanted to touch on this. The answer is there's not an out-of-the-box control, but I believe the team is working on developing integrations and kind of seeing what they can do there. But this could be a good use case for Power Apps component framework and being able to integrate that way with ACS and the Power Platform. So love seeing questions about Power Platform in the chat. Speaking of Azure Communication Services, if you do want to give some feedback on how we can help the Microsoft team here make ACS an even better product, you can go to aka.ms/ACS-survey to fill out a survey there and give us some feedback. Also, if you want to learn more and test your knowledge on ACS and other technologies, be sure to take our Collaborative Apps Learn Challenge. It starts today and it ends on November 30th, so you have a whole month here to finish that challenge. You can go to aka.ms/challenge/collaborative apps to follow the Learn modules and complete the challenge. All right, we've had so many great sessions so far. Now it's time, we're going to turn it over to Aicha and George to talk about bringing your applications where your users work every day. Over to you, Aicha and George.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. I hope you're enjoying Learn Together so far. My name is Aicha Bash. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. In this session, my colleague George is joining me. Hi, George. How are you doing?
Very fine, Aisha. How are you doing? My name is Juma George. I'm joining you from Nairobi. I work as a program manager in the Microsoft Graph team, and I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're super excited for this session today, and we will talk about how you can bring your app where all the users work every single day. So let's start with a real question. What are the apps we use every single day at work? So every day for me, I join the meetings, I chat with my colleagues, I send emails. So I use all these apps in Microsoft 365. What about you, George? Which ones are your favorite?
I find Teams really useful. Every day I have to log into Teams for collaborations, but I also use OneNote and Outlook to just get emails and things like that.
Yeah, I guess Teams is really primary for me for chatting with my colleagues, also joining in meetings. But I also love to use to-do lists, for example, just to keep my day-to-day tasks. So probably all of them I'm using every single day. So in this session, we're going to talk about how we can bring this data from Microsoft 365 into your apps. As we learned in the previous Learn Together event, which was Learn Together Microsoft Graph, all these actions, while we're using Microsoft 365 products, are actually creating data in Microsoft 365 Cloud. And we can get this data into our apps using Microsoft Graph API. If you missed Learn Together Graph event, and if you are interested in deep diving into more in Microsoft Graph, you can check out aka.ms/devguide/graph, so you will be directed to the related video. In the session specifically, we're going to talk about how we can track changes in Microsoft 365 Cloud. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit role playing here, me and George. Let's say I am running a large company and George is here to help me from Microsoft as a product manager. I will ask a couple of questions to him and let's see how he can help me. In my company, we build our own collaboration app as we call it Brainstorm app. As you see in the previous sessions, we already have Azure Cloud Communications for video and chatting. We have Fluid Framework for real-time brainstorming notes. We know that Microsoft Graph provides us data from Microsoft 365 Cloud. So that's why we also use Microsoft Graph Toolkit in our app to get user profile. We embedded a login feature using Graph Toolkit, and we get people's information, again, using Graph Toolkit components, and we leverage from providers for the authentication too. We want to implement one more thing into our brainstorming app. So while we're collaborating in the Brainstorm app, if one of our colleagues become available, we want to receive a notification, real-time notification about that person's present status. So George, how can we track changes real-time in Microsoft 365 data? Is it possible to do that?
Yes, it's very possible. So basically, we use the Microsoft Graph Change Tracking service that we run here in Microsoft, sometimes called the webhooks. So what this mechanism does is that it helps you get notified whenever there's any change that happens in any of the Microsoft M365 services. Like for instance, if you receive an email, then you get to get a notification that you have actually received an email. So yeah, that's how you can get real-time notifications from Microsoft Graph.
Okay, that sounds interesting and exciting. Why we use change notifications?
So we use change notifications for various reasons. One of them is if you wanted to refresh maybe your application or just kickstart any custom logic that would want after you get a notification, then you can actually take advantage of change notifications.
Okay, this sounds amazing. But I have one more question. Now what I understood is Microsoft Graph actually uses a webhook mechanism as a change notification. But we have thousands of employees working in my company, and we want to track all of their present changes. So when we track all of their changes, which is a huge number of notifications, can webhook handle this? Is there any better way to do that? How can we track changes without getting any issues?
Great question. So webhooks can handle various loads, but not high throughput scenarios where you have so many notifications coming through, especially the scenario you've painted around your own organization. So the idea here is that since Microsoft Graph change notifications can actually deliver notifications in real time through Azure Event Hubs, then you can actually get take advantage of the event hubs and fetch the notifications from the event hub. It will help with high throughput scenarios.
Interesting. So what is Event Hubs? Why should we use Azure Event Hubs?
Event Hubs, basically, if I can explain it shortly, this is a streaming service that streams events in real time. So it's built for specific scenarios where you have heavy traffic of notifications or any events that you are emitting. And also when you have a big organization like yourself, then this would really work for you.
Okay, so what kind of scenarios are the best for change notifications and Event Hub feature?
So when you have large data sets, when you have a large pool of resources that you want to get notified, then this is the best approach. So you can take advantage of the event hubs on that. Also, when you have high frequency of notifications, so maybe you're receiving notifications every milliseconds or something like that, then probably this is the best option for you. And also when you have a very huge organization that has multi-tenants and applications that cut across several services, and you want to still get notified whenever there's a change, then this is a great way to go about receiving notifications.
Awesome. This definitely works for us. So how can we get started?
Well, yes, you can get started in two main steps, basically. The first step is you will need to create an Azure Event Hub. So once you create an Azure Event Hub, you need to take note of the Event Hub connection string because you'll use it later, and I'll explain why. The second step is you will need to create an Azure Key Vault. So the Azure Key Vault kind of just secures your connection string. So you will get the connection string from the Azure Event Hubs and load that connection string to the Azure Key Vault. Then you will use the Azure Key Vault as your new notification URL where you'll be able to receive notifications.
Okay, that's awesome. So can you quickly walk us through how we can set up all these you mentioned?
Sure. The first step, as I mentioned earlier, is you will have to create an event hub, an Azure Event Hub. So once you create an Azure Event Hub, the next step is just create the Key Vault. You get the Event Hub connection string and load it to the Key Vault. Once you do that, the next step is just create a subscription to the specific resource you want to listen to. So for instance, if you wanted to listen to Teams conversation, for instance, you will create a subscription using the URL that is on this presentation that we have down there. So that will act as your notification URL in your subscription payload. And then with that, you're able to create a subscription. After that, every notification, anytime there's a change in the resource you've subscribed for, you will be able to get notifications through the event hubs all the way to your app. And then you can consume the notification however you like.
Awesome. So that sounds easy.
Yes. Aisha, I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Aisha, can you show us how we can use change notifications through event hubs in the Brainstorm app that you mentioned to us earlier?
Yes, so now let's assume that we learned everything from George, how we can set up Microsoft Graph change notifications with Azure Event Hubs. Next step for us is getting Microsoft Graph Presence API change notifications delivered real time in Brainstorm app. Now I'm going to walk you through how we're going to do that in Brainstorm app, and then I will just walk you through the demo and show you how we did it. So as you know, we have Microsoft Graph Presence API change notifications. We will use Microsoft Graph change tracking. And we already set up a Key Vault and Event Hub, as George mentioned, we follow his way. Now we are getting Event Hub connection string from the Key Vault, which is saved there securely. And then we're using Power Automate Flow to create subscription. To do that, we first need to use Azure Active Directory to authenticate our flow, and then Power Automate Flow will create subscription for us every single hour. And whenever there's a change happening in the presence status of any employee, then we are gonna receive these changes in the event hubs. Next step for us is handling the function apps to deliver the data real time in our Brainstorm app, so that we will set up event hub messages as an input in our function app, and we will set up Signal R as an output. Here, we are trying to create a server for us to deliver data real time. As you saw in the previous session, in the Fluid framework, it does everything for us, and we don't need to create any server. So you can only use Fluid framework straightforward. For us, since we're creating a custom data delivery mechanism in real time, we will need a server in the background. So we leverage from server R here, a Signal R here. So once we set up SignalR as an output, our final step is just getting data real time through our React app. And the data will be broadcasted through our app real time without any need once we do all this setup. Yeah, so that's about it.
It sounds great, Aisha. So can you show us how it works in a demo?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's do the demo. Now we are in Azure portal. I already created event hubs and Key Vault. Let me quickly go to event hubs to show you how it looks like. Here, you can create multiple event hubs if needed, and you can see what kind of data coming through here. I will go to event hubs and show you our event hub for presence. This is the event hub you're using, and this data is coming through. We can see the changes in this graphic. We can copy the connection string from this event hub, and then we will use Key Vault to store our connection string securely. First of all, we will need Vault URI to create notification. And then we will need secret name again for the notification URL. And after that, we will be able to connect our connection string to event hubs straightforward. So as you know, we're using Power Automate Flow to create our subscription. That's why I created a flow for us already. Let me quickly walk you through how this flow works. This is basically only for subscription. Let me edit that and show you. This flow recurs every hour, basically, and we are tracking changes for a group of people on Teams. We are tracking changes for a team on Microsoft Teams, and we are getting their IDs as a type of array. And final step is just creating subscription. I created a custom connector here in Power Automate Flow to do that. And here we're just doing a post to subscription at the top of the hour. So we're tracking updated changes. Notification URL is exactly the same what George showed us. I copied Vault URL and pasted here. I also pasted the secret name. And final step is the tenant ID. Our resources, communication, presences, and our array of user IDs. And finally, we have expiration date as in 1 hour later. And this flow works every hour. It's actually even working right now. So let's go ahead and test if our Event Hub subscription works. I will change Ellen's status. Let's say do not disturb. Let's go to Event Hub and see if there's any changes. Okay, let me click here. And yeah, so now we saw the changes and it's literally real time. I just changed the status of Ellen and I turned back to Azure portal, and now we changed it. We see the spike in the graphic. So this is awesome. It definitely works.
Works great. So far we've seen how to create a subscription and how to receive notifications onto the event hubs. Do you mind showing us how you receive the notifications from the event hub to the React app that you showed us earlier?
Yes, so here comes the tricky part, our code. Let me walk you through how we did the setup in our functions and as well as our brainstorm app. Okay, so this is our app, and here are functions. In the negotiate function, we basically handle the authentication of the SignalR. Basically, we do the negotiate with SignalR connection. Our output is SignalR connection info, and in the index, you will see we only keep the connection info. That means negotiate only handles the SignalR connection with Azure functions. So the second step, which is the place we do everything else, in the broadcast, we keep input as Event Hub messages. That means input will be all of the messages coming through Event Hub, and output is going to be SignalR messages. So whatever we get from Event Hub, we will send it directly to SignalR. And let's go to index.js and show you how we did that. Here, we keep all of the Event Hub messages. We basically get everything from Event Hub as a message. And at the bottom, we send all the data coming through to SignalR as a SignalR message. So instead of sending all of the JSON file, I refined our data a little bit because we don't need everything coming through in the change notifications. In our case, we only need ID and the availability of the person so that we can create notification in our app and basically show the user's profile using the ID and show the availability, the status of the person. So that's about it.
That's very interesting, Aita. You showed us how the notifications are refined and how you get the availability and ID. Do you mind showing us how you connect these functions to SignalR?
Yes, exactly. That's a great point. I created SignalR on Azure too. Let's quickly go to our resource group on Azure. And this is our SignalR. Here in the SignalR, you can get the connection string. And you can copy. If you're using SignalR, if you're basically using your functions locally, you have to create local settings JSON file. So you will keep your SignalR and the event hubs connection string in this file. If you are setting up your function apps on Azure, then you can handle the connection between SignalR and the event hubs directly on the portal. You don't have to create any local file. So the next step for us is just doing the connection, basically creating connection in our app to SignalR. When you go to the Brainstorm app, you will see we have SignalR connection TSX file, and here is our SignalR connection function. We have API-based URL, which is our notification function URL, and we do the connection directly in here. We get the message from Azure Functions, and then we send it here as a notification. And we basically send the data as a toast notification in our React app. So here's the toast container we're using. Let me show you our Brainstorm app. Okay, so here's our Brainstorm app. I logged in here as Aicha, and George and I are here hanging out, working on our brainstorming. We're doing some projects, working on some projects with the notes and so on. But we want Ellen to join us too, so we don't know if he's available or not. Let's go ahead and change Ellen's status and make it available. Okay. So while we're working in the Brainstorm app, wow, we get a notification in the Brainstorm app showing that Ellen becomes available. That's awesome. So we want him to join us too. So I will invite him. When we click invite, Ellen will receive a message from me saying, come join us, collaborate with us. And Ellen will receive a URL. Once he pastes this URL in the browser, he will be directed to Brainstorm app, and then he can log in. And once he logs in, he can basically join us in the discussions. That means in our team, whoever is available, we will get a notification, and we can basically invite him using the notification box. And there we go. 3 of us are hanging out and doing the brainstorming and working here. What happens when, let's say, any of us becomes away, or we get offline, or we lost our connection and so on? We definitely want to be informed about our teammates, our colleagues in the brainstorm session if they get offline or if they change their status. So, oh, now I see George became George basically changed the status, so he became be right back. So in this case, I guess it is really great to see the logged in user status too, if it has changed and became different than available.
Very interesting, Aita. I have another question for you. How do you get to send the notifications with user profiles? Do you make graph calls for that?
Yes, exactly. So let's quickly go back to our code and let me show you the graph notifications file. Here we basically have notification function. We get all the data from Signal R, and we do a quick check if the user status is available. And we basically get only available status. And also if the user is different than the logged in users, then we basically use Microsoft Graph Toolkit person component to send the user profile card. We also have a button here which calls Microsoft Graph Teams API to send a chat message to the user to invite that person, basically. And finally, we send the toast notification for the steps we'd like to. And the second part is if logged in user gets offline or change the status, then we also send the person card to show their status as the status has changed. Okay, so that's about it. This is all about Microsoft 365 part of the Brainstorm app.
That's really great. That's mostly how our customers currently consume the graph change notifications. That's a real life end-to-end scenario. Thank you for that, Aisha.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that's all about our session. If you would like to try out Brainstorm app in the real-time notifications in the Brainstorm app, you can check out the GitHub repository in ak.ms/github-repo/brainstorm app. Make sure to go to M365 branch to see all these features with SignalR, Event Hub, and the change notifications. So that's all from us, folks. I hope you enjoyed our session. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was great. I'm probably a bit biased here, I'll admit, but I love seeing the Power Platform in action there. When you opened up that Power Automate flow, I smiled a little bit. I kind of geeked out, so that was really great. And it's cool to see the Microsoft Graph in action too. It's a really powerful tool for getting real-time presence and connecting with Microsoft data. And from a Power Platform perspective as well, there's so many different ways that we can connect and integrate with the Microsoft Graph in our Power Platform solutions. We have things called custom connectors where we can have a connector to connect natively to the Microsoft Graph and pull information like maybe presence data and any other information that you can get there directly from the graph. So many possibilities and integrations there. So thank you so much, Aisha and George, for that amazing session. All right, well, we're getting close to the end here, actually. So why don't we turn it over to Burke and Bridget? They're going to be talking about how we can enhance productivity and collaboration from a development perspective using some cool GitHub and VS Code features.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last session of this Learn Together event, the best session of the Learn Together event. They always save the best for last, or at least that's what they told us. This session is called Enhancing Your Development, Collaboration, and Productivity. That was the session title they gave us, but we rewrote it to Write Anywhere, Run Anywhere. My name is Burke, and I work with the VS Code team at Microsoft, and this is my colleague, Bridget. Hey, Bridget.
Hey, Burke. Yeah, my name is Bridget, and I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Code team. And today, Burke and I are going to show you how you can truly write your code anywhere and run it anywhere, depending on your preferences. So if we go over to the next slide, it might look a little bit familiar for your current workflow today. So you might start off with some source code in GitHub. And then you might clone it locally using your terminal. And then you go ahead and work on it in your favorite editor. So let's say VS Code. And then you make some changes, you're coding, and then you want to bring those changes into GitHub. You push, you do commits, you open the terminal again, you're back in the browser. You have to do some context switching, and the cycle continues. That's why we have all these awesome arrows. So we stopped and we thought, what if we could eliminate some of these extra context and switching? And what if we could just bring this process down to Visual Studio Code into GitHub or a web browser? Or even better than that, what if we could just use Visual Studio Code? Or what if we could just use a web browser and we didn't even have to install anything on our local machines? This is actually possible today. So we're going to hop over to some demos and show you how it's possible. So Burke, over to you.
Awesome. Let's get into it. All right. So this is the application that they've been working on all day. And we're going to work on it too. Same application. Now, normally what we would do here, as Bridget was describing, is we come and go to code and copy this here, then come back to the terminal, clone it. Well, we're actually not going to do any of that. So let me jump over to Visual Studio Code. And the first thing that we want to do is just open this project, but I don't want to actually clone it. I just want to open it. I shouldn't have to clone it to look at it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is click down here in the left-hand corner. I'm going to go down to, let's see, open GitHub repository here. And you can see that it's already pasted in for me the repo to open. But if I back up, I can just say open a repository from GitHub, and I can actually type my repo name or my account name, and then you can see the repos right there. So let's see, the Learn Together Brainstorm app, and I'm going to select that. Visual Studio Code's going to reload, and what you're going to see is that this project is loaded in Visual Studio Code, but it's not actually cloned. I didn't clone anything. I just opened it. And the reason why that's possible is because of an extension called the GitHub repositories extension. It's always about extensions. And this allows you to do just that. So we're actually viewing this project directly on GitHub, and we can open these files, and it looks like they're running locally. We get syntax highlighting and all that good stuff. We can even do things like preview Markdown, which is really nice, but we're just looking at it on GitHub. Now, in the case of this project, there is a point at which like we want to run this app. So to do that, if I was to like open up a terminal, it would be my terminal on my machine, but I don't have any access to this project, so I can't run it. So in that point, I do need to clone it. So to do that, we can just click here in the left-hand corner and say continue working on. And then we'll just say clone the repository locally and pick a spot for it. That works. We'll just put it here. And now we're cloning. But again, we didn't have to go back to GitHub to do that. We can just continue on. And now we're actually working locally. So this screen you may have seen before, this is called Workspace Trust. If you use VS Code, it's a new feature. Basically what it does is it asks you to trust the folder because there's extensions and code that could be executed automatically when a folder loads, and we want you to be safe. And so this is a new feature. Once you say that, yes, you trust for this folder, it doesn't ask you again. So I'm going to say, yes, I do trust because I trust you, Dan. You're a good guy, I think. All right, so we now have this thing cloned locally and we can run it. So if we look at the README, there's some steps to do that. But my problem with this is that I feel like the one thing they didn't check into this repository is their whole development environment. And I wish that somebody would have done that so I don't have to follow any of these steps and it would just run. So let's do that. Let's check our entire development environment into GitHub. So to do that, we're going to use something called the Remote Containers extension. Lots of extensions in this presentation. It should have been called extensions, extensions, extensions. So the Remote Containers extension here is already installed. And what this does is it allows us to define an environment that will run inside of a Docker container. So how do we add a configuration for this project since I don't know that much about Docker? Well, you don't really have to. We come here and say, add development configuration files here, and then it's going to inspect my project and see that this is a node project and give me some options. So I'm just going to choose node because I don't need any of that other stuff, and I'll take the default. And when that happens, you'll see I get a pop-up that says, hey, you have a dev container configuration. Do you want to reopen this in a container? And I'm going to say, whoa, VS Code. It's not VS Code. It doesn't work that way. VS Code, hold your horses. Not yet. But we get a dev container folder, and in that, there's two files. One is a Docker file, which defines the image that's going to be used to run this project, or the Docker image, the container that will be spun up. And the other one defines some properties about that environment. And this is where we want to make some changes to automate all the steps that are in this README here. So for instance, like this section down here, let's go ahead and automate some of this away. So the first thing that it wants us to do is run npm install. So what we can do here is you can see that it's actually already there. We just need to uncomment this. We can do a yarn install. It's the same thing and will work just fine. It's a little faster. And then the other thing that the README wants us to do is it wants us to create an environment variable. We can actually do that too. So let's come here and we're going to use a property called container env. And then below that, we're just going to put the container env, and then the value is FRS. I believe, wasn't that the value? FRS, okay. So at this point, I need to select rebuild and reopen in container. And then what's going to happen is Visual Studio Code's going to restart, but it's going to begin to build this dev container. You can see that here. If we want to, we can look at the logs, and if you're a Docker person, you might recognize some of what's going on here. I sure don't. But what's happening now is the container's up and running, and now it's executing yarn install. So it's installing all of the dependencies that this project needs to run. Okay, so the application's up, and we can add a note, include your whole dev environment. Fun. All right, awesome. So now what we want to do is we want to check our whole dev environment into GitHub. So how do we do that? Well, all we need to do is check in those files, and we'll include the yarn lock as well, which is not a problem. So let's go ahead and stage these changes. And then we'll just say, let's see, add whole dev environment. And we'll go ahead and commit them. You can see I'm doing this all from VS Code. I'm not actually going on the terminal at all to work with Git and GitHub. And then let's create a new branch. Again, I'm not going to the terminal. I don't even know how. And then we'll just do a new branch called the whole dev environment. You can see we're on that branch. And you can see we're on that branch and we have a little icon to push. So let's push. And you can see it knows that my origin, and in the upstream, it even knows where the fork is upstreamed from. So let's push to my origin. Push that branch up. Okay, so that branch has been pushed. And now I want to create a pull request. But again, I'm not going to go to GitHub to do that. I'm going to do it all from here. So from here, I can create a pull request. I'm just going to click on the pull request button here and then go ahead, and it thinks that I want to probably do a PR to the upstream, which would normally be true, but I'm just going to do to my own repo to the main branch. So from this branch to this branch, and then here, I put the whole dev env in the project. You're welcome. Okay, and then we're just going to create the pull request. All right, so our pull request has been created, and again, it opens right here. So if you haven't caught on yet, we're doing everything just right here without leaving, right in VS Code. And of course, I want a reviewer on this pull request. So let's go ahead and Bridget, would you be so kind as to review this pull request for me?
I would love to review your pull request, Burke. Thank you. All right, and then I'm going to hop over to your repo in the browser, and let's go over to the pull request tab. There it is. Okay, so normally when I get tagged in a pull request like this, I have a couple of options. So I'm taking a look at it. I put the whole dev environment in the project. You're welcome. Okay, cool. So typically I'll go over and see the files changed, and maybe I'll explore them by clicking and viewing the file or editing it. I could even open in desktop. But sometimes when I view the file here, I'd really prefer to take a look at it in VS Code because that's the environment I'm most familiar with. And taking a look at it in VS Code requires a context switch from the browser, or requires me to save it on my local machine or something like that. So really the quickest way I can think to do it is I actually have this cool trick where I can just hit the dot or the period key on my keyboard. So I'm going to do that now. And when I do that, GitHub's going to tell me it's setting up a web editor. And once this loads up, it's going to be what's known as the github.dev web editor. And what this is it's going to be VS Code running entirely in the browser. And it's going to be this lightweight instance of VS Code that's great for doing things like reviewing PRs and doing some lightweight code exploration and looking at new repos and things like that. So it's really awesome for instances like this where I get tagged in a pull request and I want to go ahead and take a look at the changes, and I want to get it in this familiar VS Code environment. So I'll close out of the terminal for now so I can get a little more real estate. And so I'm brought immediately into the pull request. So it saves a ton of time. And I can see in the status bar here, I'm on pull request number 1. So for instance, I could go ahead and start leaving some comments immediately. So I could say, I think checking in the environment makes a lot of sense. And I can start, I think this is a stroke of genius. So I could either start a whole review, or I could even just add a singular comment. So I'll add a singular comment. And taking a step back from adding some more information or adding some more comments, I want to take a look at what this web editor provides us. So if I go over here, we're going to see we have some of the same buttons that we have in desktop VS Code. So for instance, I'm going to have the files that were on my GitHub repo. So I could open up the README, for instance, and we're going to have different things, like we're going to have syntax highlighting and completions for different languages. If I go over here to the search, we're going to have multi-file search. So I could search for the word run, for instance, and it's going to give me results across multiple files because we can actually enable indexing. If I go over to the extensions view over here, I can install different extensions, and you can actually enable your extensions for the web. So for instance, I'd like to maybe go ahead and make my environment a little bit more exciting with a different theme. So let's go ahead, and one that I think is cool is Fairy Floss. So let's install that. And then once that installs, cool. So I have an even more exciting web editor experience. And then once I go ahead and maybe change my theme, install some more extensions, I could even go over to the gear and I could turn on settings sync. So that way I could sync this environment with my local VS Code instances, for example. And I could see I have some other options as well. So I could choose to switch between stable and insiders VS Code. So I have a ton of different options to get the latest features and fixes entirely in the browser. All right, so now that we've kind of seen some of the things that the web editor has to offer, let's go back to specifically some of the PR or the GitHub features. So if I go over here to GitHub, I can see that I can view the different pull requests that are open on the editor or on this repo, and I can view it in the editor. So for instance, I can see this PR that Burke had opened. I'll close out of this, and I could open up the description. And that description is going to be that same one that Burke saw in desktop VS Code. So I could add some other reviewers or some other assignees and labels. I can also see other issues that are open on the repo. If I wanted to, and I wanted to make other changes on this repo down the road, I could even go ahead and create new pull requests on this repo. I also think that it would be cool to potentially add some changes to this branch and directly to this pull request. So what I can do is I can go back to the README here, and I could go ahead and add some new content here and push it directly. So when I think about the change that Burke just made, he went ahead and added a dev container. And I think it would be really helpful to folks who are going to use this app to know about the dev container. So right now the README says how to run the app locally in a few different ways. So let's go ahead and add a new section to the README to talk about running in a dev container. So I'm going to add a section here that says running in a dev container. And I'd actually like to make sure that I'm getting my markdown syntax correct because, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. So we can actually open the preview to the side. Cool, looks good. So I'm going to say install the remote containers extension. And then I'll say ensure you have the .dev container, because we want to make sure folks are on that branch or that it's been merged in. Reopen in dev container, and then magic happens. Kind of the basic premise of using a dev container I think will help folks get started. So I can go over the source control view, and now let's go ahead and commit this change. So I'll say update README with dev container info. Now it says my changes are going to be committed directly to the branch that I'm working on. So when I go ahead and say commit, once it commits there, the change goes away, and I don't even need to push anything from the status bar. The change that I made to the README is automatically available on the repo already. So it was really smooth, direct integration into my GitHub repo. So now I'd actually like to try out that repo or that dev container that Burke added to our repo. But since this is a lightweight instance of VS Code running in the browser, it doesn't actually have back-end compute. So if I go ahead and, for instance, open up a terminal, it lets me know that terminals aren't available in the web editor. So if I'd like to use a terminal, I need to go ahead and continue in another environment that can actually run code, like desktop VS Code or a GitHub code space. So there's a really smooth transition to doing that. So I can say continue working on, and I could either clone my repo locally, or instead what I'm going to do is create a new code space on this repo. So I'll click on this option. Now we're going to be brought into a code space in a new tab. And now code spaces says that it's going to connect and set up a code space. It even says it's building a container. And that's because it's going to build a container based on that same dev container definition that was set up in the dev container JSON and the Docker file that Burke already created with the remote containers extension. And that's pretty convenient because that means that once we create one dev environment for our repo, it's going to work across all our different environments. So whether we're working in desktop VS Code or if we're working in code spaces, we're going to be able to use that same configuration everywhere. So now that we're in a code space, we're going to see that it looks pretty similar to the web editor we were just in, but now it actually has a functional terminal. And so it's going to have some greater capabilities like having a terminal, having backing compute, because code spaces are actually going to be backed by a virtual machine. You can have different virtual machine sizes depending on the needs of your application. It's going to have the full set of Visual Studio Code extensions that you can use. They don't need to be specially web enabled and things like that. And we can even see in our terminal, it's running that post create commands, that yarn install, to do some final setup to make sure that we have all of the tools and dependencies that we need to run our application. All right, so now our code space has been set up, our container was built, and our terminal is available and ready to run some commands in. So I'd like to go ahead and try out our app. So I'm just going to do an npm start because I think that's all we need to do. Let's go ahead and try it. npm start. Starting up our server and connecting to the forwarded port. So just like in desktop VS Code, Codespaces is going to take care of port forwarding for us and pop us over to a new tab where our app is going to be available. And let's see how it looks. Alrighty, and here we are. It's the same application that Burke was working on in desktop and now in Codespaces in the browser. So I could go ahead and add a note. Let's say, hello from Codespaces. Awesome. And something cool to also note about Codespaces, even though I'm in the browser, there is a VS Code extension. So if you would prefer to work in desktop, you totally can. But we wanted to show that you can totally work in a VS Code environment without having to download or install anything locally at all. So here we are in our application. And if I go back over here, we can see we have a very similar ports view that we had in desktop that Burke had seen. And something else neat to know is that we have this privacy option for our port. And if I right click on it here, I could change port privacy. So I could even change it to public so that Burke and I could work on this app together. So you can see it, which is pretty cool. All right, and so that is a run through of our different options to write and run code anywhere. So I'll hop over to our last slide. So thank you so much for joining Burke and I to take a look at how to write anywhere and run anywhere. We got a look at GitHub repositories, remote containers and dev containers, the GitHub Dev Web Editor, and GitHub Codespaces. So really a full gamut of different Visual Studio Code experiences and using GitHub as well. We have a link here, aka.ms/write-anywhere, where you have some additional resources like some docs and some videos and even some opportunities on GitHub, for instance, to file some feature requests and issues. So we really love to hear your feedback too as you try out these different experiences. So please let us know what you think. And as always, happy coding.
Happy coding, y'all.
Wow, thank you, Burke and Bridget. That was an amazing session. First of all, that browser editor is wicked cool, and I totally can't wait to get a hold of that fairy floss theme. I love that. I'm going to check that out right after this. I loved GitHub Codespaces. It really seems like a great way to collaborate with other developers, so I'm interested in checking that out too. And I just love that you can literally write anywhere and run anywhere. So just great stuff. Thank you so much. All right, well, that wraps up today's event here, our Learn Together Developing Real-Time Collaborative Apps event. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot today, and I can't wait to take some of these tools and concepts that we've learned and apply those to the applications that I'm building. But the learning doesn't have to stop here. Don't forget to check out our Collaborative Apps Learn Challenge at aka.ms/challenge/collaborative apps. And check out our Microsoft 365 YouTube channel for more tutorials and tips and tricks at aka.ms/M365 YouTube. For event resources and on-demand content, check out our event page at aka.ms/learntogether/collaborative apps. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. We had so many great sessions. Thank you to our speakers today for everything that you did. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you at future live streams. Thank you. Bye-bye.